Chapter 5 of the e-novel The Walls Came Tumbling Down, as read by the author. Ankle lift. Despite the chill winds, the steep back road was causing sweat to run down his back. The shoulder straps chafed and burned. Tom knew that his plan wasn't going to work. His mind had been fixated on a possible solution. He needed to find a bicycle. He was healthy and a good runner and athlete, but 700 miles with a rucksack just wasn't possible. His back told him this. His feet told him with every agonizing and wearing step the same. His mind was already exhausted, wearied from the lonely boredom of walking alone. At first, the scenery had been deceptively serene, pastoral even. The sounds of distant gunfire periodically reminded him of the ever-present dangers. He thought of the bicycle in the back of his old truck, a nice little road bike with heavy-duty tires and a place to hang panniers, but somebody had stolen that from him back in New Orleans. While he was paying for his fuel inside and getting coffee, someone had come up, grabbed it out of the back, and it was gone before he even saw the guy leave, right at the time when things were just starting to go bad. He thought of how quickly the situation had changed, going from tense to very bad, then rapidly descending into utter chaos and pandemonium. People that had probably been sane and peaceful once had become violent, desperate, and panicked. Desperate people did desperate things, and he was glad that he had escaped. The cities that had once been so pleasant, centers to indulge yourself, places with nice restaurants, to catch a movie and go shopping, had quickly descended into places of violence, death, starvation, and chaos. He would now have to avoid them, adding even more miles to his already lengthy journey. Navigation was becoming hard. At least he had his pocket road atlas, small though it was. Thank God for that. The Garmin satellite was still working, but his solar panel barely gave him enough juice to get more than a few minutes each day. He now simply walked north. Sometimes the roads were cooperating, mostly though they weren't. If they weren't steep, they seemed to meander around way too much, following the terrain instead of blasting straight down the middle like the interstate did. No way he would use those things, though, not now. He had to find a bike, but where? Gibeonites. I resisted the urge to panic, despite every fiber of my being shouting at me to do so. I remembered that in such times, keeping your wits was the most crucial thing. I took in a deep breath and quelled the fear, put my mind to the task. I had to think. Here we had no concealment, and they had optics. They knew roughly where we were as well. The snow provided no protection from fire, no cover should they decide to do so. The trees would provide little protection, especially if they sent a few through the forest to circle around to get behind us. We were outnumbered by more than 3 to 1, and we had no real force multipliers, nothing to even things up. Their weapons appeared to be hunting rifles, and it would be reasonable to presume they had some skill and accuracy using them. Never underestimate the enemy was rule 1 of combat. Yes, we might have an advantage in volume of fire, but they would balance that with greater accuracy. If they got around behind us, we were finished. I knew the terrain better than them, but at this distance, that did not serve us as any kind of force multiplier. The only escape route for us lay to our rear. Indeed, and unfortunately, our tracks led directly back to the farm. If they should overcome us, if they should win. I put that thought out of my mind quickly and prayed and asked for help. It came. A plan was suddenly there. A moment ago, nothing, and now, suddenly in a flash, an idea. It was from a Sunday school lesson. Some men, Gibeonites, had come upon the Israelites and tricked them into believing they were from a faraway land by putting on old clothes with holes in their shoes and carrying old wine skins, even some moldy bread to add to the ruse. We would do the same. Quickly and quietly I explained the plan to Steve, and he nodded. A tense grin spread across his face. Staying on the ground, I called out, "Hey, don't shoot! We're hunters too!" There was a long pause as I knew they were discussing what to do next. I also assumed that they were right now sending men, some men of their party, to try and get behind us, perhaps up on the higher ground or round to the east. No answer, so I called out again, "Hey, have you guys seen any game today?" A moment later came the reply, slow, taunting, and surly, "Nope, how about you?" I knew that our voices were helping the flankers also to pinpoint us. I had to take that risk right now, though. I said casually to Steve, "Well, here goes nothing," and I stood up slowly, swiveling my rifle around behind me on the sling as I did so. For a brief moment, I fully expected to hear the crack of a rifle, or worse, to feel the impact of a bullet in my chest, and hear nothing. My body cringed with anticipation. My nerves wound up until I thought I would snap as I waited. Holding my hands up with my rifle hanging out of view, I said, "You guys got anything to eat? We are real hungry." There was a little conversation among them now, and I distinctly heard the leader say, "Shut up," to his men. Then he shouted back to me, "We got nothing, nothing to give, nothing extra if that's what you're asking." I quickly offered, "Hey, we got cash money," which we all knew was worthless. I was trying to play myself off as a complete fool, trying to lull them into a false sense of security. I could hear laughter, and the man said, "Really? You got cash? Well, where the hell am I going to spend that anyway?" More derisive laughter. Then insistently he demanded, "Hey, are you from around here?" The voice was interrogating in tone, demanding. He wasn't curious. He was probing, fishing. He clearly believed he was in control of the situation, and that was exactly the delusion I wanted him to operate under. I was playing on his ego as much as I would later play on his fear. He was also plotting something, and I had a good idea just what that was. "Yeah," I lied. "We live back on the south side of town." That was the poor side of town. I was painting an image in their mind of poverty, of destitution and ignorance. People almost always presume poverty equals ignorance. It does not. With any luck, they would figure we weren't worth shooting. I shouted back, "My name's Sam." Then I continued very submissively, "Hey, are you fellas from around here?" The leader was standing up with his rifle in his hand, cockily balanced on his hip, menacingly, one foot on a stump. The great white hunter, the conqueror. I saw it right through it, though. I could see he was a little apprehensive as well. Above all, I knew they were quite desperate. Steve was watching carefully, looking for the flankers, but had yet to see anything. I suspected they had stopped their advance, at least for the time being anyway. I continued with the charade. "Can you guys please help us? We're so hungry, and my friends are bad sick too." Pausing, I added, "You got any medicine?" That last twist was a double curve. I had not only introduced the element of more people than they could see, I also brought up sickness. In times with no medicine or doctors, it was like the plague must have been in the Dark Ages. In the past, we all took the easy medical access in this country for granted, and now we realized how important that was, what we had all lost, what we had all failed to plan for. There was a heated discussion going on now as the men were desperately trying to figure out what to do next. Their leader's tone now changed. It was oozing with false sincerity. "Wish we could help you, buddy, but we got no medicine." Then he continued, "How many of you are there anyway?" Playing innocent and dumb, I quickly answered, "There's 3 more, but they're just up the hill behind us. Cousin Johnny is real bad sick. He's in his sleeping bag. He's covered with all these white bumps. He can't hardly breathe, neither. I got some of them too, and so does Jimmy here," holding up my arm to point, knowing he couldn't see them. I was giving the description of the smallpox, but whatever I was describing, it was definitely contagious. Their discussion got emphatic, and one of them I heard say, "Hell no," loud enough for me to hear, and Steve as well. "Hey, you stay away now, you hear?" the man commanded, but this time there was obvious fear in his voice. Many men will be brave in the face of enemy fire, but few willingly tangle with any disease. Yelling loud to his flankers, he called, "Bob, Dave, get back down here quick." To our right We could hear in the distance men now crashing loudly through the snowy underbrush, headed back down toward their leader. "Now look, buddy," he began, almost pleading. "You guys just go on back where you come from, okay?" Continuing, he added, "You go your way and we're going the opposite." Threateningly, he added, "Don't you come near so you'll be sorry." I chuckled at the last. If we really did have the smallpox and came near, he would be the one who was sorry. As the men quickly left the hill, moving away from us, I yelled, "If you guys find a doctor, please send them back this way." And then I raised my voice louder, adding, "The folks at that farm behind us got it too, only a lot worse. Please, please send help." Soon the woods were quiet again. We waited to make sure it had worked, and I thanked God for the outcome. Smiling at Steve, I called back to the girls on the Motorola and told them to go to full alert, but that everything was okay. Then we remained in place, shivering a while, until we could hear the men long gone. I was certain they would not come back. Mouse. Tiny feet trudging delicately through the snow, compass in one hand, Linda did her best to follow the map. It was quite outdated, but still accurate, at least as far as the terrain was concerned. She had been careful thus far to not get too close to any farms or signs of civilization. Periodically, she smelled the air and looked for smoke or any sign of habitation. How sad, she thought, in times of past, if she were in this condition, she would, without hesitation, have sought the nearest house and called for help. Now, still traumatized by the horrors she had just gone through, she sought quite the opposite. In her mind, she imagined the voice on the shortwave radio as belonging to a kindly old man with gray hair and tender eyes and a warm smile. It dawned on her that she was imagining him to be just like her great-grandfather. He had died when she was just a little girl, but she remembered him vividly. So kind. Still, it gave her hope and strength. Mark had packed her bug-out bag so carefully. It made her weep when she thought of what a good man he was. He was so kind, so loving, and now he was gone, so brutally murdered. She pushed that thought out of her mind, but it was hard. He had packed this very bag with his hands, and everything in it he had carefully picked out, deliberately. She couldn't go there. Not now, though. She had to survive. He would want that. She was grateful how thoughtful he was. In addition to the socks, the sleeping bag, a warm scarf, and thick gloves, there had also been several days' supply of concentrated food packed in. She was trying to ration that out now. She didn't want to arrive empty, but she would probably have no choice. There was a good survival knife, a compass, a map, binoculars, the little shortwave receiver, a Motorola, and a tiny thermoelectric stove. By making a cooking fire in this, it also created enough electricity to charge her Motorola, the Garmin, the shortwave, and even the tiny flashlight. The bigger Garmin, the one with good reception, had been in the cabin, and that was now stolen. Most thoughtful of all, Mark had also hidden a few pieces of silver, a nice watch, and a single gold coin, nearly 1/4 of an ounce. She would give them to the nice man or trade them for things she needed. She cried despite her best efforts not to. She felt so all alone now. What would she do? What if? She stopped herself short and cried out loud, saying, "Come on, Linda, put on your big girl dress and be brave." Trembling hands clutched the rifle close to her chest, tears running down her face. She plodded through the snow, trying to be brave. Mark had taught her to stay in the trees when she moved. It was easier to travel in the snow, and it was also easier to hide. She had turned the jacket inside out. It was not as comfortable this way, but the black lining was more camouflage than the beautiful red on the outside. It was snowing, but the trees kept most of it off her. She had pulled her hair back and was wearing the fleece cap and scarf, their sage green adding a bit to the camouflage. The bug-out bag was now camouflaged the way Mark had taught her to do, using bits of fir branches with lots of clumps of needles, Placing it on various parts of the bag, it broke up the outline and also hers. It wasn't perfect, but it would work for now. As midday neared, she stopped and made a little fire in the stove, careful to only use dry bits of sticks and to get up near the trunk of the tree so the smoke would be dissipated. Any smoke that did come would be blown away and up the tree. She also charged up the radio. It had a hand crank on it, but this way was a lot quieter and easier. She put in the radio earpiece and turned it on, not moving it from the frequency, hoping to hear the man's voice again. After a half hour, though, she heard nothing, and so she packed up and moved on. She estimated she was only a day, maybe two away. How would she find this man, though? Should she just go up to the nearest house in the town? The thought of that made her hands tremble as she realized the potential danger. No, she would have to be much more cautious. There might be a radio antenna. That didn't exactly narrow it down, though, not in this vast and lonely wilderness. Taking the compact binoculars up from her neck, she carefully scanned ahead and then moved quietly and softly like a little mouse. Bunker. Peering out the window of his cabin over the snow, he thought he saw a small figure moving quietly along the edge of the clearing. Grabbing his binos, he looked, but could see nothing. After a minute, he finished pouring the hot water into the LRP ration. It would be his only meal for the day, chicken teriyaki. He thought about the future, but it looked kind of fuzzy, especially about feeding himself and long-term survival. Sure, he had cans of heirloom seeds. He had bought those from the same place where he got his ammo. But now he wondered, could he make anything grow? Gardening was never really high on his list of things to do. He lamented the fact that he had spent so little time learning something that really seemed so simple. Still, how could it be? He had a shovel. He'd simply dig in a garden, just like the pioneers did. He wondered, though, when should I plant? Obviously, after the snow melted. He scanned again, but saw nothing. He had cleared the brush from around the cabin back to about 300 yards, and now he wished it was a lot further. A bunch of scavengers had shown up on snowmobiles, and while they were scoping the house with rifles, he had fired a shot over their heads. They simply rode off a distance and fired one back, right into the window. Now he sat well away from the windows, no light behind him either. Occasionally, on the shortwave, he picked up some news. He cranked the generator by hand and hit the digital scanner, but there was nothing now that he could receive. He had a nice unit, but not much of an antenna. Something he hadn't thought about too much, but perhaps he should have. Some of the news was disturbing, too. There were unconfirmed reports, of course, reports of things like cannibalism around New York City. He took a bite of the teriyaki. The rice was still a little crunchy, but he was so hungry, and he wolfed it down. It tasted good. Nearby, stacked his body armor and helmet. After the little close encounter, he had worn it for a couple of days, but it didn't seem like they were coming back, so he took it off. Still, he carried the M4 in his Kimber 45 at all times. Near each window were stacks of magazines as well. He had set the Remington 870 near the window on the north side, an AK-47 with a pile of mags near the west, and the same near the east. The heavy barrel AR, with the night vision scope and the IR laser, the PEC 14, that sat against the south window. While the night vision and lasers served as a significant combat multiplier, thus making him more effective, as though there were several of him in the cabin, at least at night, the extra guns, well, they were not much good unless there was somebody else to shoot them here. To his north was a really thick and boggy swamp, a wasteland filled with blueberry underbrush and thick, impenetrable scrub. This giant swath extended around like a horseshoe, leaving only the south side open to his cabin. He knew somebody could therefore not come at him from the swamps, not without some difficulty. They would have a devil of a time getting to him. He therefore kept a watchful eye mostly to the south, but did occasionally check out the other windows. The cabin had in it a wood stove, but in reality, that was looking more like a quaint novelty, a token gesture. It wasn't an effective heater for this poorly insulated cabin. He was using the oil-fired furnace. If things weren't so dangerous, he would have hung blankets over the windows. You could literally feel the cold the closer you got to them. Down in the tiny basement, the fuel bunker was nearly empty. He was going to be in trouble very soon, and he knew it. Professional amateur. David sat sipping his tea in the warmth of the kitchen. He thought of his long-departed Sarah. She had gone on to glory now, and he missed her. Her picture hung up over the mantel, her things still in the closet. It seemed irreverent to him to move them, even though his daughter had tried 2 years ago on one of her visits. She and her husband would make it soon, though. At least he hoped. Perhaps when the snows melted and the roads opened. He had never remarried. He was too old, he thought. Certainly too curmudgeonly. He laughed at this. He was content instead to live with her in his heart. Those memories were more than any man could have asked. Still, though, he wished now she was here. He needed her so badly. The reports on the radio were disturbing. More than that, they were alarming. Things were not getting better, they were getting worse, much worse. Riots, starvation, bands of marauders, and other things, unspeakable things. He shuddered at the last and worried. Fewer and fewer of his friends were transmitting now. Only a handful of them were set up like he was, with some sort of renewable power. Although David mostly kept to himself, he thought now he should go and tell the neighbors, but who? He liked Al and Jacqueline. They were a bit eccentric. He was a cowboy and she was from someplace in South America. And the two of them were pretty good cooks, although at the first church picnic he brought Texican food that was so spicy hot everyone took one bite and had to run over and drink all of the lemonade. They also talked a lot, but not much, about being ready, about preparedness. He didn't want to be a burden, though. He didn't want people to see how lonely he was. Still, he would go by and see them later. They were only half a mile down the road. A good walk would do him well, especially on his snowshoes. Rummaging through the pantry, he found a tin of cookies and got a couple out to go with his tea. He had a good supply of food put back, but what would he do when that ran out? He knew his Air Force retirement check would be no good, even if they did manage to turn the electricity on and figure out how to get a direct deposit to his bank that no longer existed. At least nobody was coming around to collect the bills, though. Certainly not the light bill. He laughed, amusing himself with that last one. Still, how would he get food now? The stores were closed. They were empty. There was nothing to sell. Maybe the general store in town would open back up when the farmers went back to growing, but would they take money? He thought of the cash he kept in the cookie jar. Probably not. What was it worth? The world would probably go back to bartering. Food would be more valuable than gold, especially with the reports of people eating each other. Still, though, would the farmers have any fuel for the tractors? Did they have enough seed put back? He knew they were all buying that genetically modified stuff. He had heard them talking about it. It was great for higher yields, but you couldn't save any of the crop. Nothing for seed for next year like they did when he was a boy. He knew there was trouble on that one for sure. What would he do? He thought of the Amish. They seemed to have the right approach after all. They would probably not be affected much by any of this, if at all. He ambled down to the basement and looked at the gardening tools Sarah had left, neatly put away so many years ago, right before she died. There were some dusty packets of seed, several years old, and probably past their date. Flowers mostly, a few herbs, and some green beans. There was a little potting soil in the bag that was surprisingly still moist to the feel, and a few clay pots sat nearby. He got out the soil and filled a few pots with it, and then carried them one at a time back up the stairs, setting them gently in the windowsill of the kitchen sink. Carefully, he planted the bean seeds, then watered them, and tried to remember the things that Sarah had told him. Now, don't water them too much, he could hear her tender voice, but don't let the soil go dry either, David. Yes, dear, he said sweetly, of course. He put the pots in the kitchen window where they would get the most morning sun. realizing this was going to be nothing but a start, a token gesture at best. He was in trouble now, he knew that, but what could he do? Too bad there aren't any job openings for hams, he thought, and then it hit him like a bolt of lightning. Eureka! That was it! He knew he was the only one with so much news of the outside world, with a real connection to it. Current news, and he could ask questions to his fellow hams, questions about specific cities and things that were happening that no one else could see where he was. More importantly, he was definitely the only one who could transmit to the other side of the globe that he knew of in this area. He therefore had something people would need, and that something used to be free. Now it was completely non-existent. It was news and information. Rushing upstairs, pausing at the top to catch his breath, he opened the printer next to the computer. He had maybe a ream of paper there, and the cartridge had some life left in it too. In the drawer below, he looked quickly, and there he saw it, a brand new extra cartridge and several reams of paper. Good old Sarah. He could almost hear her voice now. Yes, David, I knew you would need that too. He sat down and wept. He had been so lucky to have her. Indoors. Greg had not wanted everyone to move into the farmhouse for his own reasons. After the last raid, though, a line had definitely been crossed. Everyone now saw just how easy it was to kill, to murder. It's like ringing a bell, and you couldn't unring it. They would never be the same. He wished now they hadn't killed a man, although they had enjoyed taking his woman. He smiled when he thought of that one, his lips curling wickedly. He didn't care about the man he had murdered. It had been easier than shooting a deer. That wasn't what bothered him at all. No, it was because that first kill had let the genie out of the bottle. Now that they had killed, you see, everybody got big ideas. That first night, sitting around the campfire, bellies full, backsides cold, the idea was presented that maybe they should just all move into one of those Amish farms. At least there it wouldn't be so god-awful cold. The more they talked about it, about warm beds and fireplaces, tables and chairs, the more he realized they had already made up their minds. Greg had nothing against that at all, certainly not about killing or robbing the Amish. He would have loved that option except for one thing. He knew that once they started occupying farms, they would all start to go their separate ways. He hated these scum, but he also needed them. He needed them for when they found that place that he wanted. After he got into his place, he could care less what they did, whether they lived or died. Still, though, he had argued against it. He made up excuses and told lies, but it was hopeless. Now that the scum were inside and warm and well-fed, they would never go back to that campsite. He would have to figure something out quick, or like so many others of his dreams, they would go up in smoke too. Right now it wasn't so bad, though. It certainly had benefits. The little Amish girl, probably 17, was so easy to control. She would do anything he told her to do. He found that out the first night. All he told her was that if she didn't make him happy, she'd kill her and her little brother. She believed him, too, because she had watched them shoot her father down in cold blood. She set the plate of food down near him, hands shaking, avoiding his eyes. He obviously scared her, and he liked that. He liked it when women knew who was in charge. He grabbed her around the waist, pulled her onto his lap. Hey, girlie, what's the matter? Don't you love me no more? She knew better than to tell the truth, though. Little Sammy needed her to submit, to do whatever it took. Yes, I mean, he shoved her away laughing and said, "Get me some more coffee, girlie, and something sweet." He leered at her suggestively with the word sweet. He liked the fact that she was afraid of him, terrified. It made him feel strong and powerful. As she scurried away, she thought she would vomit, hands trembling, frightened. She knew, though, that this was all just a bad dream, that she would wake up soon, and that Papa would be alive, that she and Mama, Sammy and Sarah, would be safe and snuggled in their beds, waking up to fresh coffee and chores any moment now. She knew that it was all a bad dream, because this could not be real. It was all just a wicked, terrible dream. Luck. Tom's luck had changed in an instant. The road he was on had sort of led him to it. Great, he thought, another detour. this time through a junkyard, probably going to be full of twisted metal and barbed wire, and with a mean dog too. He checked his pistol to make sure it was hot. Then he saw it, the frame of a bicycle. It dawned on him. It was missing the front wheel, but most bikes could interchange parts. He dumped his rucksack and began scurrying around, making a pile of bike parts he knew he could use. He found a frame and a good rear wheel with an almost new and fully inflated big fat tire. Perfect. The front wheel was bent, of course, and the handlebars broken, or it wouldn't have been in the junkyard. The forks were still true. Another bike had a good front wheel and a few other parts, but the rear and the chain and most of the rest were ruined. He had to find tires that were firm and aired up, because he had no tire pump. He found what he needed and a lot more. He probably could have built 2 or 3 bikes, but he only needed one. As a result, using his Leatherman tool and some ingenuity, he managed to cobble together a fairly decent road bike. He even found a good seat off of another one, a nice, wide, comfortable cruiser. As he worked, though, the sun began to set and he thought he should get away from here. Something about this place. Some other scavenger might show up and shoot him from hiding. Still, he marveled at the stuff people threw away. It was amazing how so many people appeared to know so little about how things worked or how to fix them. When he finished the bike, he also had a front and rear rack on it and a luggage carrier for the back. He was ecstatic. Quickly, he divided his gear up into 3 somewhat equal loads. A third on the front and a discarded milk crate tied to the rack, a third on the back carrier in the large stuff sack, and the rest would be on his back in his ruck. He also found numerous empty plastic soda and water bottles. Using paracord, he fashioned slings for these so that he could hang them off his bike. Although these, when filled, would add pounds of more weight, he could extend his range, especially if he found really good or clean water. The water purification tablets he had were going a lot faster than he had planned. Fortunately, for travel, he was slight. He only weighed 140 pounds, or that bike would have been seriously overloaded. His food was running low now, and he supplemented it when he could. It was late February, and the bicycling, the cold, and the altitude had made him go through his chow a lot faster. In his rucksack, he had a small bait fishing net and also some tackle. That net was actually illegal in most states because he could essentially run it from one side of the stream to the other and herd the fish right into it. Whenever he found a good stream, he managed to always get something therefore. Good thing, too, because there was little in the fields to forage this time of the year. Additionally, he didn't want to go noisy with his rifle and was very leery of the watering holes as it was. Animal tracks always brought hunters who might decide that he made an easier target. He was glad, too, that he had chosen the fishing tackle over snares because he was on the move. Fishing was easier to disguise and yielded quicker gains. Snares, if found by an enemy, could give away your presence. They often took days to yield anything. Besides all that, fish was higher in protein. Most of his food was high-carb stuff, especially the MREs, with all those crackers and cookies and candy in them. At first he thought the bike would quadruple his speed or more. That would have been true without nearly his body weight in gear. Now, though, he realized that instead of sustaining 15 to 20 miles per hour, he would be lucky to average 6 or 7, and then only for a few hours each day, perhaps 20 or so miles total. He couldn't just stay on the road and take off either. There were too many people still wandering around. Some days he would hear sporadic bursts of gunfire, firefights. When the shooting stopped, it always meant somebody had won and somebody had lost. The shortwave radio wasn't very strong, and only if somebody was sending on high power could he pick up anything at all. He knew that all this gunfire was coming from the marauders, sporadic bands of them. The looters and raiders were apparently learning quickly. They were learning that there was strength in numbers. Later they would learn there was also a problem with that too. From now on, he would have to travel at night. This has been Chapter 5 of the e-novel, The Walls Came Tumbling Down, as read by the author. Tune in next Friday for Chapter 6. Thank you.